Welcome to the Affirm Wellness Podcast, where we will explore the many facets of wellness. In each session, we'll dive into inspiring stories, give expert tips, and practical advice to help you live a healthier, more fulfilling life. In this episode, we will explore the importance of setting healthy boundaries in all aspects of life: work, relationships, and personal well-being. Boundaries are essential for protecting our energy, maintaining self-respect, and fostering meaningful connections with others.
Deshauna, how you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty rested and accomplished and just really excited as always to just kind of dive into our topic for today. What about you?
Feeling pretty good. It's a lot of stuff going on in our country, but I'm just trying to stay focused on the goals that I've had for myself and for business and just professional, personal goals and things like that. So just what I'm focused on and not letting all the outside noise kind of mess with the focus that I have for myself.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because that's the encouragement that I've given myself and then also other people around me who are so worried about a lot of things. You know, they're justified for worrying. But one of the things that I said is just don't be distracted. Focus on yourself, what's in your control, because sometimes things are put in place for us to get distracted and off track. And we don't need to do that, not in this state.
Definitely. I think that's why today's topic about cultivating healthy boundaries is important, because we do have to have healthy boundaries in order to stay focused and work towards the goals that we have for ourselves personally, professionally, and just overall. And in order to do that, we have to learn how to cultivate healthy boundaries.
So that kind of rolls us into our topic for today. Today, we're going to talk about healthy boundaries. And I want to share the quote for today's session. It's your responsibility to care for yourself without excuses. Focusing on how others might respond is one way we ruminate, which impacts our ability to act. How they treat you is about who they are, not who you are. Nothing other people do is because of you. Nidra Glover Tawwab.
That's a very interesting quote. And I feel like some people are going to try to disagree with that because, you know, we like to blame things outside of ourselves for things happening to us that, you know, that person made me act that way. That person made me respond that way or do this that way. And the reality is that we have control over how we respond versus react. And I always give the example of reaction. Like when we react is more impulsive. When we respond is more calculated. It's something that we're thinking about how we're going to respond. And we put thoughts towards responding. But when it comes to react, it's very impulsive, you know. And so I agree with Nidra's quote about like, when it comes to what other people do and things like that, it's not about me. It's about how they feel and what's going on with them. And I could also give an example of taking accountability with that for myself too. Like if somebody's bothering me or irritating me, oftentimes look internally and say, what is it about this situation that's bothering me? And recognize, because that person is moving this way or they're not very honest. And it's still about me that I don't like certain characteristics about this person. Then it's up to me to set those boundaries with that person. And so when you look at it that way, then it's your ability to be able to control your interactions with certain people. But when you look at it like it's outside of yourself, then nothing's ever going to change. You can't ever be able to set healthy boundaries because you're looking for the other people to change to be in alignment with what you feel like they should be.
And they may or may not change.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
Exactly.
Right? It's
exactly.
okay if they don't change. I have to bend to make sure that I'm doing the things that I need to do to show up for myself.
Exactly.
Because I can't help that certain things that certain people do may be triggering for me. Right. And for me to blame or be the victim or, you know, things of that nature because of what somebody else is doing, it serves me an injustice. So
Definitely.
I have to be aware of those triggers and making sure that I'm showing up for myself.
Definitely. Because even like in relationships with friends, romantic relationships, I always think about, which I think the most challenging relationship that we can have, especially because we're both married, you know, because we're with this person all the time. Like it's something that I feel like I've learned healthy boundaries from the most. Because when I think about like being married, I've been married for almost 15 years now. And one of the things that I've learned in my marriage is to be mindful of my own boundaries and not project that on my partner. And so because I do that, I'm able to have healthier relationships and communication with my partner able to understand his perspective better and listen to his perspective better. If I didn't have those healthy boundaries for myself, then I wouldn't be able to recognize that he has his own boundaries as well. Because sometimes we focus on what our boundaries are and we forget that other people have those boundaries as well.
Absolutely. And that creates a lot of friction.
Definitely.
A lot of friction. And we, if we fail to listen and we fail to pay attention and be willing to look at somebody else's perspective or just think about what their needs are sometimes, right? Just quiet time. Someone was talking to me about that the other day, just kind of quiet time, right? Just being able to go and collect their thoughts after a long day, maybe after an argument and things of that nature. And someone doesn't have to give you permission to do that. That's a huge thing that a lot of people talk about in relationships, right? It's just, well, I need my time. I need my space, or they may need other things, right? And the other person doesn't necessarily have to agree to give them those things. It's about what you need.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And when we talk about boundaries, a lot of times people use the word boundaries very openly and they're not necessarily understanding that there are different types of boundaries. And so I do want to talk about the different types of boundary categories. There are porous boundaries, rigid boundaries, and then healthy boundaries. And how I describe it to keep it very simple is that porous boundaries is basically like oversharing, giving too much information. And a lot of times people that are people pleasers often fall into the category of porous boundaries, meaning that like they want the acceptance of others. They want to be acknowledged a certain way and they feed into outside sources for validation. And so they do things that cross their boundaries to get validation from others. And someone with a rigid boundary is the opposite of that, meaning that they're very restricted. If somebody with rigid boundary might say something like, I cut people off all the time. And, I don't trust people. I don't tell anybody anything. I stay to myself. I avoid people, things like that. I hate people, things like that. And so rigid boundaries aren't necessarily bad if you're trying to protect yourself from something, that is abusive or something like that. However, in its extreme, it's very unhealthy because we need people. We need community.
Absolutely.
In order to survive in this world, we need community. And so when we have rigid boundaries, then it keeps us from having healthy community. And so how I define healthy boundaries is basically a balance of porous and rigid, because sometimes you don't need to share a lot of things about yourself, but then sometimes you do need to be able to share. But you have to have a balance. A healthy balance of it is called healthy boundaries. That's how I look at it. And there are different types of boundaries that you have to be mindful of when it comes to porous boundaries, rigid boundaries, and healthy boundaries, especially for something like emotional boundaries. You want to have healthy boundaries. But physical boundaries, you want to have healthy boundaries. Because if somebody has porous physical boundaries, then it's touching, like somebody can touch you inappropriately and you don't say no and it's eating you up inside. And so you have to be clear about what your boundaries are for yourself so that when somebody does something that's inappropriate or uncomfortable to you, you're able to communicate, hey, that's uncomfortable for me. Or keep yourself outside of a situation that that every time I go to the situation, my boundaries are always disrespected or ignored. So I'm going to be mindful of how I navigate myself in that situation. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. Another big one is, the time boundaries.
Definitely.
Overcommitting, right? Especially for helpers, right? You want to be helpful. You want to show up for people and things, but you can't do everything. So sometimes if you find yourself overstretched because you're constantly saying yes, because you've got those porous boundaries, you get tired, you get burnt out, and then guess what you start doing? You start blaming
everybody else, yeah.
Right? Oh, they're asking me to do this, they're asking me to do that. That's because you continue to say yes.
Yes.
So that's another big one that a lot of people talk about are those kind of time boundaries that we need to be very, very mindful of.
Yeah, definitely. Oftentimes as a therapist, there are a couple of boundaries that I recommend for people to read because there are different examples in those books that kind of break down, day-to-day activities and relationships and how you can navigate setting healthy boundaries with that. And I recommend that if you want to learn more about setting healthy boundaries, those books are very, very vital to that. One of the books is by the person that we quoted in the session, Nija Glover Tawwab. And she has a boundary book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And then there's another boundaries book by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. That book has Bible verses for especially a lot of faith-based people find it difficult to set healthy boundaries because it's like, what would Jesus do? kind of type of situation. And I always tell people, Jesus had boundaries. Like if you read the Bible, you will see that he had boundaries in the Bible and things like that. So just kind of being mindful of those things. And so if you want to explore boundaries even more for yourself, definitely reading a book, watching some YouTube videos and things like that to learn, go a little bit deeper into understanding what healthy boundaries are.
Because it's not something that we're necessarily born with, the skill of setting healthy boundaries. It takes time, experiences, and also just kind of being aware of what your needs are. And sometimes what's your environment? What does your environment look like in order to show up for yourself in a way that you're ready to set boundaries? And sometimes it may look like other people may have been born with that skill. They've had it all their lives, but it's not. It really, really takes time and effort to practice.
Definitely.
And you do need to you got to read about it. You have to listen to it. You have to be around other people who are also promoting healthy boundaries in order for you to really learn it and master it. And it's a continued process of just kind of growing and learning and figuring out what kind of works for you.
And you definitely do have to be intentional about it. Like you have to be like every situation I go into, I'm very mindful of my surroundings, what I don't like, what I do like, and things like that. So that when something happens, I'm not reacting. I'm just responding however I need to respond. So maybe I need to leave a little bit earlier. Maybe I need to sit somewhere differently. I'm always mindful of that. I'm very intentional about my boundaries. And also because I'm intentional about my boundaries, I'm respectful of other people's boundaries as well.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that one. Awareness is key. It took me a lot of time to really master the skill, and I'm still learning.
Definitely.
But because I'm a helper and I love people, it's one of my things, right? But I realized that, sometimes naturally people can take advantage of other people if you have certain skills and resources and things of that nature. And so it's not their fault, right? It's just I have to kind of be a little flexible with how I'm showing up in these rooms. And then also, as a parent, also making my kids aware of what that looks like,
Definitely.
because we can't avoid relationships, right? Like I think you mentioned it earlier. We need people, right? That's one of our hierarchy of needs, a sense of love and belonging, right? And so it's not healthy, I'm going to say, to be in a bubble and not connect with people. So we really have to learn how to establish boundaries and guidelines with how we show up for ourselves in these spaces.
Definitely. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's vital in helping people understand what boundaries should look like and how to navigate these relationships when it comes to healthy boundaries. But it all starts from self.
Absolutely. It's an internal process, right?
Yeah.
Because, you can get frustrated that someone may not be respecting your boundaries and things of that nature, but it's really up to you and how you are showing up for yourself. What's your internal dialogue like? What kind of boundaries do you feel like you need to set for yourself? How do you learn them? How do you reinforce them, right, over time?
Yeah. One of the things that I do when it comes to setting healthy boundaries is something that I want to be mindful to kind of tell our listeners is kind of knowing your limits.
Yes.
And being able to practice saying no. And I always say no is a complete sentence. So, period.
Yeah.
And the more you practice saying no, the less difficult it is. Because sometimes, I've had clients that I work with tell me like, when I say no, it's easy for me to say no. But what happens after I say no is like that guilt, that anxiety starts coming in. Maybe I do have it, blah, blah, blah. And so I have to break it down to them why saying no is important because I think somebody told me the other day, a family member asked them to borrow money and they said no because they had just given them money during the holidays and this person is choosing not to work. They're choosing to get money other ways and they're choosing not to work. And so it's like, so why is that my responsibility now? Because you knew you had to pay this money for over a year. Like this is not something that you just found out. It's something that you knew over a year. And so now you're making it an emergency for me, but your emergency is not my emergency. You can't make your emergency my emergency.
Absolutely.
And so being able to recognize, hey, I made this decision because I'm not going to enable people's bad behavior. That's a boundary that I have for myself. So I need to be mindful of that. So teaching the clients that I work with, people that are around me, like, hey, yes, you feel bad because you're a good person and you're a person that's giving and supportive, but sometimes people could take advantage of that and abuse it and not grow and not learn from their bad behavior because you continue to enable their bad behavior.
What's also important is that understand that along with setting boundaries, you will feel uncomfortable.
Definitely.
Especially at the beginning. And it's okay with feeling uncomfortable. It's okay to feel guilty sometimes. But what's on the other side of that is being so proud of yourself that you were able to say no. Or that you kind of self-directed or redirected focus on you. If something's going on with you, I statements are so important, right?
Definitely.
This is the way it's making me feel, right? As opposed to, boo baby, you did something to me and you made me mad. You're causing me to isolate.
I ain't know how that power.
Okay. Now I have rigid boundaries towards people because something you did to me. Sure, it's an experience, right? But I get to choose how I perceive it and how I respond to it.
Definitely.
Right? So I think that another thing is that we talk quite a bit about just in our conversations together is personal bill of rights and just, kind of being okay with considering other people's boundaries. You don't have to agree with them, but just being able to be considerate of others, is so key and so important.
Definitely.
In professional relationships and personal relationships.
Definitely. And then I think also, Deshauna, I think we have to be mindful of just evaluating our boundaries regularly and making changes as needed. Because certain things that I was open to before, like in my 20s and my 30s, I'm not open to anymore.
Hello.
Especially when it comes to relationships. Yeah. I'm very big on, I need something reciprocal. If I don't have reciprocal relationships right now, I don't want them. Mm-hmm. Back in the days, I was the person that I say back in the days like I'm 1,000 years old, but prior to me getting into my 40s, I was very I'm a helper. Like Deshauna says, we're both helpers. That's why we connect very well together, but we're both helpers. And that's why we get along because we consider each other. But I've had relationships where I'm giving and not getting anything in return. I want to be fed too. I want to be able to express myself too. And I think that's one of the things that I like about my relationship with Deshauna is because I get to express myself and tell her I don't have deep, dark secrets or anything like that, but I get to tell her deep things. And I haven't really had that, apart from my sister, like I always talk about. I haven't really had that with a lot of friends. I have a cousin that I talk to, I can go deep with, but I haven't really had that. And I want that. It's not that I don't want it, but I have to feel safe. I have to feel safe enough to be able to communicate with you. And because of my boundaries, I know who I need to talk to and who I don't need to talk to based on the way that they present themselves. I love you. I care about you and I want the best for you, but I don't have to have that connection with you like I did before because it's no longer serving me well.
Absolutely.
And so I have to reevaluate my boundaries. And so you do have to constantly reevaluate what those boundaries are because if you stay in a boundary that no longer serves you well, then you become rigid. That's Absolutely. How you fall into that rigid boundaries. And so
it's almost like it's a protective mechanism, right?
Definitely.
Like you kind of close yourself off to certain things, certain experiences because you're so frustrated with how things are turning out. Yes. And it's because, again, we've got to go back and reevaluate who you are. And I totally agree with that. Who I was, who you were in your 20s and your 30s, you're not that same person anymore. You've had to reevaluate things so that you can make room for other opportunities and other experiences. I mentioned time earlier. That's been a huge thing for me, especially with, being married, raising a family, running multiple businesses, and also showing up for myself.
Definitely.
Right? I don't have a whole lot of time for lack of better words, riffraff. I just don't. And so I just now really pride myself in, balancing work, balancing family, and then really, really just spending time with friends who water me and pour into me. And I equally do the same. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest growth areas in my life is just taking back my time.
Yeah.
That's been huge.
Sound like that senator. Was it a senator? I'm taking back my time. You remember that?
No.
It was a senator that said that. That's
no.
Funny. I digress.
Yeah, that's okay. So the takeaway for today, healthy boundaries help us protect our physical, emotional space and ensure our needs are met. They can help us maintain a sense of awareness, self-respect, and self-esteem. Healthy boundaries are vital to healthy relationships.
Definitely. I think that's an amazing takeaway, Deshauna. And I would challenge our listeners to evaluate what your boundaries are and be mindful of the changes that you need to make to those boundaries and be able to kind of identify what those boundaries are and be very intentional about it. That's what I would challenge our listeners to do. Thank you for joining us. Remember, wellness is not a destination, but a process, and every step you take matters. Until next time, stay grounded, stay connected, and keep prioritizing your well-being.